There appears to be a mistake. This cabin is for first-class passengers, and black people like you belong in economy." Those were the words that would end senior cabin manager Veronica Keller's 15-year career. She just didn't know she'd said them to the one man who could bring the entire airline down with her. Veronica Keller's words sliced through the cabin's hushed atmosphere, turning heads and freezing conversations. Her perfectly manicured hand gestured dismissively at Elijah Mercer's boarding pass, which he'd already shown her twice. Elijah felt his jaw tighten. He'd been here before. This particular humiliation had a familiar taste. But he remained calm, his voice steady as he responded, "There's no mistake. I paid for this seat and I'm sitting in it." Veronica's lips curled into what might have charitably been called a smile. "I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to move to your actual seat in economy. We have passengers waiting to board who have legitimate first-class tickets." The white businessman next to Elijah, Terrence Blackwood, according to his loud phone conversation earlier, snickered. "Some people just don't understand how things work," he muttered, just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. As Elijah began to reach for his bag, two uniformed security officers appeared at Veronica's side. One reached for Elijah's arm, his grip unnecessarily tight. "Sir, we can do this the easy way or the hard way." The cabin fell silent as Elijah was forcibly removed from his seat, his protests ignored, his dignity stripped away with each step toward the exit. The smirk on Veronica's face was the last thing he saw before being escorted off the plane. 2 weeks later, Veronica Keller stood frozen in the center of CEO Gregory Bennett's office, her uniform perfectly pressed, but her composure completely shattered. "Do you know who you just humiliated, Ms. Keller?" Bennett's voice was dangerously soft as he held up an identification badge. "The man who holds contracts worth $50 million with our airline." Veronica's mouth opened, but no words came out. The ID card in Bennett's hand showed the same face she had dismissed so readily. Elijah Mercer, CEO of Zenith Technologies. I didn't know," she finally managed. Bennett leaned forward. "And that makes it acceptable? To treat any passenger that way?" No, sir, I just meant, what you don't seem to understand is that tomorrow morning, Elijah Mercer will decide whether to renew our technology contract or transfer it to our biggest competitor." He slid a document across the desk. "A contract that is the only thing keeping our airline solvent after the pandemic losses." Veronica felt the blood drain from her face as the magnitude of her actions crystallized. Not just her job was at stake, potentially the entire airline. But what neither Veronica nor CEO Bennett yet knew was that Elijah Mercer had a history with Atlas Airways that went far beyond a single humiliating incident, a history that would soon turn this case of casual racism into a reckoning that would shake the company to its core. 2 hours earlier. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Comment below if you've experienced this kind of prejudice. You're not alone. And now, let's go back to where our story really begins. Elijah Mercer moved through Atlanta International Airport with practiced efficiency. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. His casual attire, dark jeans, a navy polo, and white sneakers, was his trademark look, one that business magazines had profiled as part of his authentic leadership style. But today wasn't about fashion statements. Elijah was headed to San Francisco for the annual Tech Summit conference, where he'd deliver the keynote address on inclusive design and technology. The irony wasn't lost on him. A black CEO speaking about inclusion in an industry where people who looked like him held less than 1% of executive positions. As he approached the first-class check-in counter for Atlas Airways, he noticed the subtle shift in the attendant's expression, that momentary recalibration he'd grown accustomed to over the years. that split second where people reconciled his appearance with his status. "Good morning," he said, sliding his ID and Platinum member card across the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," the attendant replied after a quick glance at his credentials. "San Francisco today?" 10 minutes later, boarding pass in hand, Elijah made his way through security and to the first-class lounge. He settled into a quiet corner, pulled out his tablet, and reviewed his presentation notes. Zenith Technologies had grown from his garage startup to a $2 billion company in just 12 years. Their proprietary software now powered in-flight entertainment systems for 3 major airlines, including Atlas Airways, their first and largest client. As boarding time approached, Elijah packed up his materials and headed to the gate. He joined the priority boarding line, again noting the subtle glances from fellow passengers. "Now boarding our first-class passengers and Platinum Elite members," announced the gate agent. Elijah stepped forward, scanned his boarding pass, and made his way down the jetway. As he entered the aircraft, he was greeted by Veronica Keller, a flight attendant whose name badge indicated she was the senior cabin manager. "Welcome aboard," she said, her smile fading slightly as her eyes swept over him. "Thank you," Elijah replied, continuing to his seat in 2A. He settled in, stowed his bag, and opened his tablet again. Around him, other first-class passengers were being greeted warmly, offered pre-departure beverages, and addressed by name after a quick glance at the manifest. "Champagne, sir?" Veronica asked the white businessman across the aisle. "Thanks, Veronica," Terrence replied, clearly a regular on this route. "How's the family?" "Everyone's wonderful, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you for asking." Elijah waited patiently, but no offer came his way. When the flight attendant passed by again, he gently raised his hand. "Excuse me, could I get some water, please?" Veronica glanced down at him. "We'll begin beverage service once we're at cruising altitude," she replied curtly, before moving on. Elijah noticed that the beverage service seemed to only apply to him as the flight attendant continued distributing drinks to other first-class passengers. He returned to his presentation, choosing not to make an issue of it. 20 minutes later, with boarding completed and the aircraft preparing for departure, Veronica returned to his seat. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice raised enough for nearby passengers to hear. "May I see your boarding pass again?" Elijah looked up, surprised. "Of course," he said, retrieving it from his pocket and handing it to her. Veronica examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, flipping it over multiple times. "You're in first class," she stated, as if confirming a surprising fact. "Yes," Elijah replied, simply. "How did you come to be in this seat?" she asked, her tone suggesting there must be a mistake. "Was this an upgrade?" Elijah felt the familiar burn of indignation rising in his chest. "No, I purchased a first-class ticket as indicated on the boarding pass you're holding." Several nearby passengers were now watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Veronica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm going to need to verify this with the gate. These upgrades get mixed up sometimes." She emphasized the word upgrades as if it was the only possible explanation for his presence in the cabin. As she walked away with his boarding pass, Elijah noticed Terrence Blackwood watching him with undisguised suspicion from across the aisle. The businessman's expression said everything words didn't need to. "You don't belong here." If this makes your blood boil, hit that like button right now. Stories like this need to be shared, and sadly, as we're about to see, this situation was about to get much worse. The aircraft pushed back from the gate as Veronica disappeared into the galley with Elijah's boarding pass. He sat perfectly still, aware of the sideways glances from other passengers. This wasn't his first experience with prejudice, but it never got easier. The public questioning of his right to occupy space, to exist in places reserved for people who didn't look like him. 5 minutes later, Veronica returned, now accompanied by another flight attendant whose name badge read Skylar Rodriguez. The younger woman hung back slightly, her expression uncomfortable. Sir, Veronica began, her voice projecting to ensure the entire first-class cabin could hear, there seems to be a problem with your seating assignment. Elijah maintained his composure. I don't believe there is. May I have my boarding pass back, please? Veronica held it just out of reach. Our manifest shows this seat should be occupied by an E. Mercer, one of our Platinum Elite members. That would be me, Elijah Mercer. You're Elijah Mercer? The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. I am, he replied evenly. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Do you have any identification that confirms that? By now, every passenger in first class was watching the scene unfold. Elijah slowly reached for his wallet, maintaining eye contact with Veronica as he retrieved his driver's license and handed it to her. She studied it, looking between the ID and his face several times as if expecting to catch a discrepancy. This still doesn't explain how you came to be in first class, she said finally. Elijah took a deep breath. As I explained earlier, I purchased a first-class ticket. That's how I came to be in first class. Terrence Blackwood chuckled from his seat. Maybe he wandered in from economy by mistake, he suggested to Veronica, loud enough for everyone to hear. Happens all the time. Several passengers smiled at the comment. Skylar shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Veronica handed back Elijah's ID, but not his boarding pass. Sir, first-class tickets are quite expensive. Perhaps you're confused about your booking. The implication was clear. Someone like him couldn't afford to be there legitimately. I'm not confused about anything, Elijah replied, his voice still steady, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 500,000 miles flown on Atlas Airways. I purchased a first-class ticket for this flight, and I'm sitting in my assigned seat. I've been working this route for years, and I know all our premium customers. Then it appears your knowledge has a significant gap, Elijah responded. Now, I'd like my boarding pass back, please. Veronica ignored his request. Sir, we're about to begin our safety demonstration. For everyone's comfort, I think it would be best if you moved to your actual seat in economy. The words your actual seat hung in the air, loaded with assumption and prejudice. I am in my actual seat, Elijah insisted, his patience wearing thin. Sir, I'm trying to be reasonable here, Veronica said, her voice hardening. There are passengers who paid thousands of dollars for these seats. As did I, Elijah replied. I find that difficult to believe, she said, the veneer of professionalism slipping. Elijah had had enough. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his company ID badge with the Zenith Technologies logo prominently displayed. Perhaps this will clarify things. I'm the CEO of Zenith Technologies. We provide the in-flight entertainment systems for this aircraft, systems I personally signed off on last quarter. Veronica barely glanced at the ID. Anyone can get a badge made, sir. I need you to gather your belongings and move to where you belong. The phrase where you belong echoed in Elijah's ears, familiar in its dismissiveness, in its certainty about his place in the world. I will not be moving, he stated firmly. I suggest you check with your supervisor before this situation escalates. It's already escalated, Veronica replied, gesturing toward the front of the plane where two air marshals were making their way down the aisle. These gentlemen will assist you if needed. The air marshals reached his row, their expressions stern. Sir, we need you to comply with the flight crew's instructions. This is absurd, Elijah protested. I have a valid first-class ticket for this seat. Sir, we can discuss this in the terminal. Right now, you need to deplane. Elijah looked around at the watching faces, some uncomfortable, others satisfied. His gaze finally landed on Skylar, who quickly looked away, unwilling to meet his eyes. Fine, he said finally, gathering his tablet and bag. But this isn't over. As Elijah was escorted from the aircraft, Veronica's voice followed him. Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Perhaps next time you'll book the appropriate class of service. Humiliation burned through him as he walked back up the jetway, the air marshals close behind. He had built a technology empire, spoken at the White House, been featured on the cover of Forbes, and none of it mattered. To Veronica, he was just another black man who didn't know his place. Can you believe this is still happening today? Share this video if you think we need to expose this behavior wherever it happens. But wait, this story takes an unexpected turn that no one, especially Veronica, could have anticipated. As the aircraft door closed behind Elijah, a woman rose from her seat in the last row of first class. Dominique Foster had watched the entire scene unfold with mounting horror. As the customer experience director for Atlas Airways, traveling incognito to evaluate service quality, she had witnessed one of the worst displays of customer treatment in her 15-year career. Veronica, she called, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. "A word, please." Veronica turned, her expression shifting from satisfaction to confusion as she recognized one of the airline's senior executives. "Miss Foster, I didn't realize you were on board." Her voice held a note of uncertainty now. "Clearly," Dominique replied. "My office, now." She gestured to the small workspace at the front of the cabin. Once inside, with the door closed, Dominique turned to face Veronica. "Would you like to explain what just happened?" "Just a routine seating issue," Veronica said, her confidence returning. "A passenger was in the wrong cabin. I handled it." "Did you?" Dominique's voice was ice. "Do you know who that passenger was?" "He claimed to be some CEO. They all think having a company ID makes them special." Dominique took a deep breath. "That man you're treating like a trespasser is Elijah Mercer, CEO of Zenith Technologies. I know he showed some ID. Zenith Technologies provides all our in-flight entertainment systems, booking software, and customer management platforms." Veronica's expression remained blank. "Let me put this in terms you can't possibly misunderstand. That man you just had removed from this aircraft is one of our most important business partners. His company's technology is literally keeping our airline competitive in the market." Veronica's face drained of color as the implications began to dawn on her. "But even if he wasn't Elijah Mercer, even if he was just a regular passenger who had legitimately purchased a first-class ticket, your behavior was inexcusable." "I was just trying to protect the first-class experience," Veronica protested weakly. "By assuming a black passenger couldn't possibly belong there? By humiliating him in front of the entire cabin?" Veronica had no answer. "I want you to go out there right now and apologize to Mr. Mercer." "He's already been deplaned," Veronica said, a note of relief in her voice. "Then we're reopening the door and getting him back on board. And you'd better hope he accepts your apology, because if he doesn't, you're going to have much bigger problems than a passenger in the wrong seat." 10 minutes later, a visibly shaken Elijah was escorted back onto the aircraft. Passengers watched in confusion as Veronica approached him, her demeanor completely transformed. "Mr. Mercer," she began, her voice strained, "I want to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. We value you as a Platinum Elite member and as the CEO of one of our most important partners." Elijah regarded him silently, noting how quickly anyone can get a badge made had transformed to acknowledgement of his status once it suited her. "Your first-class seat is ready for you," she continued, gesturing toward 2A. "And of course, your flight today will be complimentary." The same passengers who had watched his humiliation now witnessed his elevation, the whiplash of status correction, almost comical in its transparency. "I don't want a complimentary flight," Elijah replied, his voice low but carrying. "I don't want an apology that comes only after you have discovered who I am. I want accountability." Veronica's forced smile faltered. "I assure you, sir, that's not—" "Stop talking," Elijah cut her off. "I'll take my seat now, and I suggest you stay away from me for the remainder of this flight." As he settled back into 2A, Dominique Foster approached. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Dominique Foster, Customer Experience Director for Atlas Airways. I witnessed what happened, and I want to personally assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated." Elijah nodded, appreciating the sincerity in her tone that had been absent from Veronica's scripted apology. "I'll be submitting a formal complaint," he said, "not just about today, but about what appears to be a pattern of behavior." "I understand completely," Dominique replied, "and I hope you'll allow us the opportunity to make this right." As the flight finally took off, 35 minutes behind schedule, Elijah opened his tablet and began typing notes about the incident. Times, names, exact phrases used. In the galley, Veronica was frantically texting her union representative, suddenly aware that her 15-year career might be over. What neither of them knew yet was that Elijah's smartwatch had recorded the entire confrontation, every dismissive word, every microaggression, every moment of humiliation captured in high-definition audio. Would you accept that apology? Comment "No way" if you think it's too little, too late. Because as we're about to discover, this incident was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. 1 week later, in the executive boardroom of Atlas Airways headquarters, CEO Gregory Bennett reviewed the formal complaint that had landed on his desk with the force of a bomb cyclone. The 20-page document, meticulously detailed and accompanied by audio recordings, had come directly from Elijah Mercer. "Play the recording again," Bennett instructed the room of somber executives. Veronica's voice filled the space. "People like you don't belong in first class." Then later, "Move to where you belong." And finally, the most damning, "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. Perhaps next time you'll book the appropriate class of service." Bennett shut off the audio. "This is indefensible," he stated flatly. "Absolutely indefensible." Beside him, Chief Legal Officer Amara Washington nodded grimly. "Mr. Mercer has grounds for a substantial discrimination lawsuit. The recording makes it clear this wasn't about confusion over his ticket. It was about his race. Who is this Veronica Keller? And how long has she been with us?" HR Director Philip Chen opened a personnel file. 15 years. Started as a regular flight attendant, promoted to senior cabin manager 8 years ago. Generally positive performance reviews. Generally positive? Bennett raised an eyebrow. Chen hesitated. "There have been incidents." "What kind of incidents?" "Complaints from passengers, mostly resolved at the local level." "Mostly resolved?" Bennett repeated. "Meaning swept under the rug?" "I want to see every complaint filed against Miss Keller over her entire tenure. Every single one." While the team scrambled to compile the requested information, Bennett turned his attention to a different document, a detailed profile of Elijah Mercer and Zenith Technologies. Elijah had graduated from Stanford with dual degrees in computer science and business. He'd built Zenith from a garage startup to a technology powerhouse, now valued at over $2 billion. The company employed more than 500 people and was consistently ranked among the best places to work in America. Most critically for Atlas Airways, Zenith provided the entire digital infrastructure that kept the airline competitive, from booking systems to in-flight entertainment to customer relationship management software. And their $50 million contract was up for renewal next month. "Do we have any personal connection to Mercer?" Bennett asked. "Anyone who might be able to smooth this over?" His chief strategy officer, Lena Patel, shook her head. "Our primary contact has always been their CTO, not Mercer directly. And given what just happened, I wouldn't count on personal connections to fix this." Before Bennett could respond, Philip Chen returned with a thick folder. "I've compiled all complaints involving Veronica Keller. There are 43 in total." 43 complaints in 15 years? Bennett was incredulous. "How is she still employed?"
Most were dismissed as unsubstantiated or passenger misunderstanding, but I noticed something when I reviewed them. 37 of these complaints came from passengers of color. 31 specifically mentioned discriminatory treatment in first class or business class. The room fell silent as the pattern emerged. "There's more," Chen continued. "I've received additional testimonials since Mr. Mercer's complaint has become known internally. This one is particularly concerning." He handed Bennett a printed email. Bennett read aloud. "After witnessing what happened to Mr. Mercer, I can no longer remain silent. For years, I've observed Veronica selectively enforce policies based on a passenger's race or perceived status. She has a nickname among some crew members, the gatekeeper. She decides who belongs in first class based on, well, you can guess. I've reported this behavior to supervisors multiple times, but nothing ever changes. Skylar Rodriguez, flight attendant." "Jesus," Bennett muttered. "This isn't just about one incident. This is systemic." "There's one more thing you should see," Lena Patel said, sliding a document across the table. "This is a report I commissioned from an outside consultant last year. It analyzes our training materials for flight crews." Bennett skimmed the document, his frown deepening. "Our diversity training consists of a 30-minute video and a multiple-choice quiz? That's it? And even that's only required once every 3 years?" Patel confirmed. Bennett sat back, the full scale of the problem coming into focus. This wasn't just about one flight attendant with prejudiced views. It was about an entire system that had enabled those views to go unchecked for years. "I want to speak with these other passengers who filed complaints, and I want to understand why their concerns were dismissed so consistently." Over the next 3 days, Bennett personally reviewed every complaint and spoke with a dozen passengers who had experienced similar treatment from Veronica Keller. Their stories followed a disturbing pattern. Black and brown passengers in premium cabins being questioned, scrutinized, and often humiliated. She asked me if I was in the right seat 3 separate times. Then she accidentally spilled water on my designer handbag, one woman recalled. "She served every white passenger before acknowledging me, and when I complained, she said I should be grateful to be in first class at all," another man reported. "I was told my carry-on was too large," another passenger recounted, while white passengers with identical bags boarded without comment. Individual incidents that might have been dismissed as misunderstandings formed an undeniable pattern when viewed collectively. The evidence was overwhelming. Veronica Keller had been systematically discriminating against passengers of color for years, and the company's complaint system had systematically failed to address it. By Friday morning, Bennett had made his decision. He called an emergency meeting with his executive team, HR, and legal counsel. "This stops now," he announced as they gathered. "We're not just dealing with Miss Keller. We're dealing with a fundamental failure in our systems and culture." "What are you proposing?" Amara Washington asked. "An overhaul," Bennett replied. "But first, we need to address the immediate issue. I want Veronica Keller in my office at 2 p.m. today." As the team discussed the broader changes needed, a more immediate concern loomed: the impending conversation with Elijah Mercer about the Zenith Technologies contract renewal. Without that contract, Atlas Airways' entire digital infrastructure would need to be rebuilt from scratch, a process that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially ground their fleet for weeks. "Do we know if Mr. Mercer has made a decision about the contract?" Bennett asked. Lena Patel's expression was grim. "Our contact at Zenith says they're actively speaking with our competitors. The incident has apparently been discussed at their board level." Bennett nodded, unsurprised. "Then we need to demonstrate that we're taking this seriously, not just with words, but with actions." As the meeting concluded, Bennett found himself staring at the photo of Elijah Mercer included in the background file. The man had built a technology empire from nothing, overcoming barriers Bennett couldn't begin to imagine. And in return, Atlas Airways had shown him exactly how little his achievements meant when measured against the color of his skin. The realization wasn't just professionally troubling, it was personally shameful. The truth always comes out eventually. Subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. Hit that button now. And as we're about to see, the consequences of years of unchecked discrimination were about to come crashing down on Veronica Keller.
At precisely 2 p.m., Veronica Keller sat rigidly in a chair facing CEO Gregory Bennett's desk. Also present were Philip Chen from HR, Amara Washington from Legal, and Dominique Foster, who had witnessed the incident firsthand. The atmosphere in the room was glacial. "Miss Keller," Bennett began, "I've reviewed the complaint filed by Elijah Mercer regarding the incident on Flight 1372 last week. I've listened to the audio recordings. I've spoken with other witnesses. And I've examined your personnel file, including the 43 complaints filed against you during your time with Atlas Airways." Veronica shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, if I could explain—" Bennett held up a hand. "I'm not finished. What's particularly troubling is not just the incident with Mr. Mercer, but the pattern these complaints reveal. 37 complaints from passengers of color, nearly all describing similar treatment." He slid several complaint forms across the desk. "Would you like to explain why Mr. Washington's first-class status was questioned 3 times on a single flight? Or why Ms. Rodriguez was told her designer handbag didn't look authentic? Or why Dr. Patel was asked if he was in the right cabin, despite being a million-mile flyer?" Veronica's expression hardened. "Sir, with all due respect, I was just trying to protect our premium experience. First class has standards." "Standards?" Bennett's voice was dangerously quiet. "What standards, exactly? White skin?" "You're making this a race issue when it's about maintaining standards," Veronica protested. "I treat all passengers the same." "The evidence suggests otherwise," Bennett replied, tapping the stack of complaints. "But let's focus specifically on the Mercer incident. You claimed he was in the wrong seat, despite having a valid first-class ticket. You questioned his identity, despite his showing proper ID. You had him removed from the aircraft, despite having no legitimate reason to do so." "He was disruptive," Veronica countered. Dominique Foster interjected. "That's simply untrue, Veronica. I was there. He was calm and reasonable, while you were aggressive and dismissive." Bennett leaned forward. "Let me be clear. You're the problem, not our passengers." Veronica's face flushed. "I've been with this airline for 15 years. I've always done my job." "Have you?" Bennett pushed a printout toward her. "This is an email from your colleague, Skylar Rodriguez. She describes how you're known among crew members as the gatekeeper, deciding who belongs in first class based on race." For the first time, Veronica looked genuinely rattled. "Skylar said that? She's lying. She wants my position." "Multiple crew members have corroborated her account," Philip Chen said quietly. "This isn't an isolated claim." Bennett opened a folder and removed a document bearing the Zenith Technologies logo. "Do you know what this is, Ms. Keller? This is our contract with Zenith Technologies, a $50 million agreement that provides the backbone of our entire digital operation." He tapped the document. "Because of your actions, Zenith is considering terminating this contract. Do you understand what that means for Atlas Airways?" Veronica's expression was blank. "It means we lose our booking system, our customer database, our crew scheduling software, and our in-flight entertainment. It means hundreds of canceled flights while we transition to new systems. It means millions in lost revenue. It means potential layoffs. The color drained from Veronica's face. Your actions, then it continued, his voice rising slightly, might cost hundreds of people their jobs, all because you couldn't treat a black passenger with basic human dignity. Veronica stared at the floor, the gravity of the situation finally sinking in. I've spent 3 days reviewing this case. I've consulted with our board, our legal team, and outside experts. I've spoken with other employees and passengers. And I've reached a decision regarding your employment with Atlas Airways. The room fell silent. Veronica Keller, your employment with Atlas Airways is terminated effective immediately. Veronica's head snapped up. You can't do that. I'll file a wrongful termination lawsuit. I'll go to the union. Amara Washington spoke for the first time. Ms. Keller, we've documented 43 complaints against you. We have audio recordings of your discriminatory behavior. We have witness statements from passengers and colleagues. I welcome you to pursue legal action, as it will simply create a public record of your conduct. This is more than just your employment, Bennett added. We're implementing a complete overhaul of our training, reporting, and accountability systems to ensure nothing like this happens again. So I'm the scapegoat? Veronica's voice was bitter. You're throwing me under the bus to save your precious contract? No, Ms. Keller, Bennett replied firmly. You're facing the consequences of your actions, consequences that should have come much sooner. Our failure to address your behavior before now is on us, and we're taking steps to correct that systemic failure. But your behavior, that's entirely on you. He gestured to Philip Chen, who handed Veronica a folder. This contains information about the termination process, including the surrender of your company credentials and the status of your benefits. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings and then off the premises. As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared at the door. This isn't fair, Veronica protested, rising from her chair. I dedicated 15 years to this company. And for 15 years you violated our values and harmed our passengers. That's not dedication, Ms. Keller. That's dereliction. As Veronica was escorted from the room, Bennett turned to his remaining colleagues. Now comes the hard part. We need to demonstrate to Mr. Mercer and to all our passengers that we're serious about addressing the root causes of this incident. Dominique nodded. I have some ideas about that. So do I, starting with a personal visit to Zenith headquarters. After Veronica left, Bennett sat alone in his office, contemplating how a single incident had exposed years of institutional failure. The company had created a system where complaints about discrimination were systematically downplayed or dismissed. They had implemented diversity training that was perfunctory at best. They had allowed employees like Veronica to believe their behavior was acceptable, even expected. The hard truth was that firing Veronica Keller was the easy part. Transforming the culture that had enabled her for 15 years, that was the real challenge. Bennett picked up the phone and dialed his executive assistant. Book me on the next flight to San Francisco, he instructed. I need to speak with Elijah Mercer in person. Actions have consequences. If this satisfies your sense of justice, give this video a thumbs up right now. But the story doesn't end with one person losing their job. True accountability runs much deeper than that.
3 days later, Gregory Bennett stood in the sleek reception area of Zenith Technologies' San Francisco headquarters. The contrast with Atlas Airways' dated corporate offices couldn't have been more stark. While his company's walls featured fading photos of aircraft from decades past, Zenith's space was dominated by a digital wall showing real-time data visualization from their global operations. Mr. Bennett, a receptionist called. "Mr. Mercer will see you now." Bennett was escorted through an open-concept workspace where diverse teams of engineers and designers collaborated in glass-walled meeting rooms. The message wasn't subtle. This was what inclusion looked like when practiced, not just preached. Elijah Mercer's office was minimalistic but warm. Books lined natural wood shelves, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bay. The man himself stood as Bennett entered, his expression neutral but evaluative. "Mr. Bennett," Elijah said, extending his hand, "I appreciate you making the trip." The handshake was firm but brief, professional courtesy without warmth. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Mercer," Bennett replied. "I felt this conversation needed to happen face-to-face." They sat at a small conference table, rather than across a desk, peers in conversation, not power and supplicant. "I've read your email about Miss Keller's termination. Is that why you're here, to tell me you've fired one employee and consider the matter resolved?" Bennett shook his head. "No, we've terminated the employee, but that's just the beginning. I'm here because I owe you a personal apology, and because I want to share our comprehensive plan to address the systemic issues this incident revealed." Something shifted in Elijah's expression, a subtle recognition that perhaps this wouldn't be the corporate damage control exercise he'd anticipated. "I'm listening," he said simply. Bennett opened his portfolio and removed a bound document. "This is our accountability and transformation plan. It was developed over the past week with input from our executive team, outside consultants specializing in DEI work, and most importantly, from passengers who have experienced discrimination on our flights." He slid the document across the table. "It has 4 key components." Elijah leaned forward slightly, his interest engaged. "First, mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing staff, but not the superficial 30-minute video we've used in the past. This is a comprehensive, ongoing program with real consequences for non-compliance." Bennett turned to the second section. "Second, we're overhauling our hiring and promotion processes. Every hiring panel will include diverse interviewers. Every promotion decision will be reviewed for potential bias. And we're implementing specific targets for increasing diversity in leadership roles." He continued, "Third, we're creating an anonymous reporting system for passengers who experience discrimination. These reports will go directly to our new passenger advocacy office, which will operate independently from our customer service department." Elijah nodded, making notes on a tablet. "Finally," Bennett concluded, "we're implementing regular audits using mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds who will evaluate the consistency of our service across different demographic groups." He closed the portfolio. "These changes won't fix everything overnight, but they represent a genuine commitment to transformation, not just crisis management." Elijah was quiet for a moment, studying Bennett with an intensity that made the CEO slightly uncomfortable. "This is a start," Elijah said finally, "but I have questions about implementation, accountability, and metrics for success." For the next hour, Elijah methodically examined every aspect of the plan, challenging assumptions, identifying potential weaknesses, and suggesting improvements. It wasn't antagonistic, it was thorough, the same approach that had built Zenith into a technology leader. When they had exhausted the details of the plan, Elijah leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Bennett, I appreciate the thought that has gone into this, but I need you to understand something." He reached into his desk drawer and removed a folder. "After the incident became public, I received dozens of emails from other Black executives and professionals who have flown Atlas Airways." He slid several printed emails across the table. "Read these." Bennett picked up the first email. It described an incident virtually identical to what Elijah had experienced, a Black doctor whose first-class status was repeatedly questioned. The next detailed a family asked to move from their assigned seats because a white passenger would be more comfortable there. A third recounted a Caribbean tech entrepreneur being followed to the lavatory by a flight attendant suspicious of his movements. "Your airline has a reputation in the Black professional community," Elijah said quietly, "and it's not a good one." Bennett felt a heaviness in his chest as he realized the scope of the problem. This wasn't just about one incident or one employee. It was about a deep-seated culture that had been driving away customers for years. "I didn't know," he admitted. "I should have known, but I didn't." "That's part of the problem," Elijah replied. "The experiences of Black passengers haven't been important enough to register on your radar. They haven't affected your metrics or your bottom line until now." The rebuke was delivered calmly, but landed with force. "You're right," Bennett acknowledged, "and that needs to change." "Yes, it does," Elijah agreed, "which brings us to the contract renewal." Bennett straightened, bracing for the worst. This was, after all, the real reason for his visit, to salvage the partnership that kept Atlas Airways' digital systems running. The easy decision would be to walk away, to take our business to one of your competitors, who have been courting us aggressively since this incident. Bennett nodded, expecting the axe to fall. "But the easy decision isn't always the right one," Elijah surprised him by saying. "Walking away might feel satisfying, but it wouldn't create change. It would just let Atlas Airways continue its practices with a different technology partner." He tapped the Accountability and Transformation Plan. "This represents a commitment to real change. If you're serious about implementing it, truly implementing it, not just while the spotlight is on you, then Zenith is prepared to conditionally renew our contract." Then it felt a surge of relief, quickly tempered by Elijah's next words. "But there will be new terms," Elijah continued. "The renewal will be contingent on quarterly diversity audits conducted by an independent firm. If those audits show insufficient progress, we retain the right to terminate the contract with 30 days' notice." It was unprecedented, a technology contract with diversity requirements, but Bennett didn't hesitate. "Agreed." "There's more," Elijah said. "We want a seat on your newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Board, not for me personally, but for a representative from our company who can ensure accountability." Again, Bennett nodded. "Absolutely." "And finally," Elijah concluded, "I want a public statement from Atlas Airways acknowledging what happened, the steps being taken to address it, and a commitment to ongoing transparency about your progress." This request gave Bennett pause. Public admissions created legal exposure, but he quickly realized that transparency was essential to rebuilding trust. "We'll issue the statement this week," he promised. As their meeting concluded, the two men stood and shook hands again, this time with genuine respect on both sides. "Mr. Mercer," Bennett said, "thank you for giving us the opportunity to do better. I know we haven't earned your trust yet, but we will." Elijah's response was measured but hopeful. "This isn't about punishing one person. It's about changing a culture. I look forward to seeing Atlas Airways become the company it claims to be." As Bennett left Zenith headquarters, he felt both humbled and determined. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it was clear. What would you do in Elijah's position? Forgive or take your business elsewhere? Let us know in the comments, because as we're about to see in our final chapter, real change requires more than just promises. It demands consistent action over time.
6 months later, Elijah Mercer stood in the priority boarding line at Atlanta International Airport, once again heading to San Francisco. The atmosphere felt different this time, not just because he knew what to expect, but because Atlas Airways itself had changed. The gate agent checking boarding passes smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer. Thank you for your continued loyalty. We're boarding first class now if you'd like to proceed." As he made his way down the jetway, Elijah noticed new signage featuring the airline's refreshed commitment to inclusive service. Everyone who belongs in the sky belongs at Atlas Airways. Stepping onto the aircraft, he was greeted by a diverse flight crew led by a familiar face, Skylar Rodriguez, now wearing the stripes of a senior cabin manager. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Mercer," she said. "It's good to see you again." "Congratulations on the promotion," he replied, genuinely pleased to see her advancement. Thank you. Your seat is 2A and will be offering pre-departure beverages shortly. As Elijah settled into his seat, he noted the subtle but significant differences in the cabin atmosphere. The crew interacted with all passengers with the same level of attentiveness and respect. The passenger mix in first class was noticeably more diverse than on his previous flight. Schuyler approached with a champagne flute. "Mr. Mercer, would you care for a pre-departure beverage?" "Water would be fine, thank you." She returned promptly with his water. "If you don't mind my saying," she added quietly, "thank you for helping us change. Things are different now." "I'm glad to hear that," Elijah replied. "Change isn't easy." "No, it isn't," she agreed, "but it was necessary." After takeoff, Elijah opened his tablet to review some work, but found himself reflecting on the developments of the past 6 months instead. The story of his experience had gained national attention after Atlas Airways issued their public statement, sparking conversations across the airline industry about discrimination in premium cabins. True to their word, Atlas had implemented their accountability and transformation plan with remarkable thoroughness. The quarterly audit results, published on their website for complete transparency, showed steady improvement in service consistency across demographic groups. The Passenger Advocacy Office had processed over 200 reports of discriminatory treatment, resulting in additional training for some employees and termination for a few who, like Veronica, had demonstrated patterns of bias. Veronica herself had become something of a cautionary tale in the industry. Unable to secure another position with a major airline, she had eventually taken a job at a retail store in the airport mall, a dramatic fall for someone who had once wielded such arbitrary power over passengers. But the most significant changes weren't about individual employees. They were systemic. Atlas Airways had completely revamped their training programs, hiring practices, and accountability systems. They had elevated Dominique Foster to the newly created position of Chief Inclusion Officer, reporting directly to Gregory Bennett. And most importantly, they had created a culture where speaking up about discrimination was encouraged rather than punished. Schuyler Rodriguez, once too intimidated to challenge Veronica's behavior, now led training sessions on bystander intervention. When the flight landed in San Francisco, Elijah found Gregory Bennett waiting at the gate. "Mr. Mercer," Bennett greeted him, "I hope your flight was satisfactory." "It was excellent," I confirmed. "The changes are noticeable." "I'm glad to hear it," Bennett replied. "We still have work to do, but we're committed to the process." They walked together toward the exit, discussing the upcoming renewal of their conditional contract. The independent audit had confirmed that Atlas Airways was meeting its diversity benchmarks, and Zenith Technologies was prepared to remove the termination clause that had been hanging over the airline's head. "You could have walked away," Bennett observed, as they reached the terminal. "Easier, yes," Elijah agreed, "but not better. Change doesn't come from punishing one person. It comes from transforming systems that enable that behavior in the first place." As they parted ways, Elijah reflected on the journey that had begun with a moment of humiliation 6 months earlier. What Veronica Keller had failed to understand was that her actions that day hadn't just impacted one passenger. They had exposed a systemic failure that affected countless travelers. In the end, the true change wasn't that a flight attendant lost her job or that a CEO got an apology. The true change was that an entire corporate culture had been forced to confront its failings and commit to genuine transformation. And that transformation meant that the next Black passenger in first class wouldn't have to prove they belonged there. They would simply be welcomed aboard as they should have been all along. This story might be fiction, but these experiences happen every day. Share this video if you believe in accountability and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Remember, change starts with awareness, and you just became aware. What will you do with that knowledge? Let me know in the comments below.